Again, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the Annual Action Plan and amendments in the eCon Planning Suite, going through best practices and tips and tricks. Before we get started, just want to share a couple of housekeeping notes. This webinar is scheduled for 90 minutes. We are expecting a large number of you to be on the line, so all lines are muted, and you can submit all of your questions through the question or the Q&A pod in the WebEx panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you are having any technical issues related to audio or screen sharing, please also submit those questions through the question panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you are not seeing the Q&A panel on your screen, at the top right-hand corner of the WebEx link, it should say, there should be a question symbol and it says Q&A. You can go ahead and click that, and that will open up the question pod for you. We'll be stopping throughout today's session to answer questions as you have, so please submit your questions as you're thinking of them, and we'll be stopping to respond to them. If we're not able to get to your question today, you can go ahead and submit your questions through the HUD Exchange Ask a Question link. My name is Chris Andrews. I'm a program manager with the Cloudburst Group. I've been working on the eCon Planning Suite and Consolidated Plan for about 7 years now, since the eCon Planning Suite was introduced. I'm joined by my colleague, John Coons, who will be helping us out with your questions as they come in, and then also by Beth Hendricks from the Office of Block Grant Assistance at HUD. Welcome, Beth and John.
Good to be here.
Hello, everyone.
To get started, we're going to use the hand-raising tool in your WebEx panel. You'll see that you have there's a little hand symbol, and when you click that, it'll raise your hand. And just to get a sense from all of you out there of what your consolidated plan cycle is. So if you can go ahead and raise your hand if 2018 will be year 5 of your consolidated plan cycle. If you're a 2014 to 2018 cycle, go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, a few of you. For those of you, you can go ahead and click your hand again, and that will lower it. And now, for those of you on a 2015 to 2019 cycle, go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, great. Good number of you are on a 2015 to 2019 cycle. And then, for those of you on a 2016 or 2017 start year, if you're will be in year 2 or year 3 of your annual action plan this year, go ahead and raise your hand. Great, good number of you as well. Go ahead and lower those hands again. And now finally, who is starting your comp plan in 2018? Go ahead and raise your hand. Great, a few of you on the line are getting ready for your 2018 comp plans. I find myself every time that I mention hand raising, I accidentally am sitting here at my desk raising my own hand, which I know none of you all can see. In today's session, we have 3 primary goals, and the first is to talk through the process of setting up your 2018 action plan in IDIS and providing some recommendations on what are the best practices in setting up that action plan. We also know a number of you on the line are preparing for amendments or will be completing amendments to your annual action plan, or you may be completing amendments to your consolidated plan, and want to talk through the process of how to complete those amendments to your action plans or to your consolidated plans. And then finally, talk through what are some of the best practices and strategies to streamline your action plan, your amendment process, to make sure all of that data is flowing from your comp plan to your action plan to your CAPR. All of you on the line now, you've been in the eCon planning suite for a couple of years. You know that the data flows through the process. It begins with the comp plan, then goes to your action plan, and then to your CAPR. And we want to talk through some strategies to make sure that that data is flowing as smoothly as possible. Before getting into the topics, just want to give Beth an opportunity to share a couple of updates on where we are in FY 2018. I've already seen a couple of questions come in about allocations, and so Beth wanted to give you a chance to share where we are right now.
So please remember, we're still under a continuing resolution. Congress has not passed a budget at this time for FY18 funding, not only for HUD, but for all federal agencies. The continuing resolution is in place until March the 23rd. We'll find out after that whether Congress passes a budget or not. That means once Congress passes a budget, by the time we receive not only the budget amount and then break it into allocations for you, it takes about 60 days. Normally we get that out faster, but generally it's around that 60-day time period. If you're concerned about when your plan is due because your program year start date is coming close or has already passed, please take a look at Notice 1801. It's the same notice we put out every single year, provides the exact same guidance we do every year about when to submit your plan. It also provides lots of great guidance about how to handle pre-award costs while you're waiting for your allocation to arrive. Really important, please make sure regardless of whatever time your program year start date is, all plans must come in by August the 16th. That's a statutory rule. We don't have any wiggle room there. And also please remember that once your plan is submitted to HUD, the field office goes through a review process, then they submit for congressional release, and a grant agreement is finally sent to you. We cannot change the status of your plan to review completed until after the grant agreement is received once congressional release process is finished. So there's a little bit of lag time between the time your plan review is completed by HUD folks and the time you get your grant agreement. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Beth. And I imagine a few of you were squinting trying to see that link for CPD Notice 1801. We will be posting these PowerPoint slides. We'll be posting a recording of today's session. We will also be sending out an email to the link to CPD Notice 1801, as well as some of the other resources that we talk about today. But I do just want to repeat one thing that Beth said, and I think so important to flag. That date of August 16th, 2018, that is the date to circle on your calendar of when your 2018 action plan needs to be submitted by. Okay, with that, we can move on to just talking through what does the action plan process look like. And we're going to be talking through each of these steps today, but want to just give you all a little bit of a roadmap of the process of completing your action plans and the order in which you all should be thinking about that process. Step number one, it begins with any amendments to your comp plan. If you are making an amendment to your consolidated plan, changing a goal, adjusting priority needs, adding or removing a funding source, those amendments to your consolidated plan need to be complete in IDIS before you begin that 2018 action plan. Once you finish that 2018 action plan, or excuse me, that amendment, you then move on to your 2018 action plan, and that's where you can either create by copying or adding a new action plan into the system. Go through, update all of your projects, make sure you have the correct set of projects in for 2018. finalize your goal outcome indicators to make sure that data is flowing smoothly from your comp plan to your action plan to your projects, and then submit that action plan to HUD through IDIS. So one more question for you all, just to get a sense of where you all are in your program. You see that you all have a green check mark. We use the green check mark here on your participant panel. Go ahead and click that green check mark if you are planning to complete an amendment to your consolidated plan as part of your FY 2018 action plan. If you're planning on making any amendments to your consolidated plan, go ahead and click that green check mark. Okay, a number of you are planning to make those amendments to your consolidated plan, or you've started, or you might not be sure. So just again, going back to this slide, that is the first thing as part of your 2018 planning process that you need to have done first. You need to get that comp plan amendment done before you move on to setting up your action plan, so your action plan can be associated with that amended comp plan. And as I was saying, amendments to your comp plan, it may be changing a funding source. You may be receiving a new CPD funding source. You may be adding, removing, or revising goals, especially for those of you who are in year 3, 4, or 5 of your comp plan cycle. There's a very good chance that your priority needs or your strategic plan goals have changed, and those all require amendments to your consolidated plan. And I do just want to make one caveat here. For those of you who are who started your comp plan in 2017, just remember your year 1 action plan is included in the consolidated plan template. So if you are planning to make an amendment just to your 2017 action plan, that actually, you'd be making that amendment as if you were making it to the consolidated plan. Regardless of your amendment, if it's a substantial or a non-substantial amendment, you need to make sure that that amendment is marked in IDIS as review completed before you create your 2018 action plan. That will allow you to make sure that all of that data from your amended consolidated plan is flowing in correctly into your 2018 action plan. And again, as that timeline noted, it is you want to be going through these in a sequential order. It will make it that much easier for you all in terms of how the data is flowing.
So if you're not sure whether you have a substantial or non-substantial amendment, substantial amendments are driven by the regulation at 91.505 or by what you may have in your citizen participation plan over and above the regulation. Those are substantial amendments in the system. A non-substantial amendment would be any minor housekeeping pieces that you want to be able to fix. Maybe you're just changing some sentence structure or you're fixing some typos, some clerical type of errors that you're doing. Those are non-substantial amendments, excuse me. Regardless of whether it's a substantial or non-substantial amendment, it's really important that you make sure HUD marks those amendments as review completed in the system. Here's the secret to the way the system works. Review completed tells the system to download all your updates and changes you made through that amendment process into your next CAPER and your next action plan. If the amendment is not in review completed status, the system considers it a draft, and it will not pull those changes and updates you made into the next action plan or CAPER. Real important key here, review completed tells the system, pull those changes into the next action plan and CAPER.
Thank you, Beth. It is so important. I think, again, one of those questions that we see come in over and over and over again in the AAQ pool is around that data flowing, and so often it's starting something before it is marked as review completed, or not having your versions line up correctly. We are going to be sharing, and I'll point out where they all are at the end of today's webinar, a number of resources of step-by-step guides and video tutorials that walk through the process of how to do a comp plan amendment, how to do an action plan amendment, how to set up the action plan in IDIS. So you all can have those printed out or pulled up on the screen next to you as you're going through these processes. But really want to just talk through here on some of these fundamental pieces, such as the review completed component in terms of completing your comp plan amendments and then moving on to your 2018 action plan. Once those comp plan amendments are completed, if you need to do them, your next step is to create the 2018 action plan. And you have two different options to think about how you're creating your 2018 action plan. The first can be copying your 2017 action plan to 2018. That will pull over all of the content from 2017, and then you will need to go in, edit, and revise the content, make whatever changes you need to make based on the changes in your program year, and then work off of that version. Alternatively, you can create a new blank 2018 action plan, and you can enter in new content to be matched up with what exactly you're doing in 2018, and not go back through and make sure that you're revising and updating everything, but just start from a blank template. Both work. You know, those instructions that we referenced, we'll send those out to you, and if you all have specific questions later on in today's session, we can go into IDIS and demonstrate how to do that setup. But you can either copy or you can create a new 2018 action plan. So what's the difference between copying versus creating your action plan? Copying your action plan, if your program management, your approach, your goals, not a lot is changing, that may be a better choice for you. That will copy all of the data from your previous action plan. You'll need to go in, you'll need to review each screen and make sure that it's been updated to 2018. It will also automatically pull your 2017 projects, and we'll talk more about this later, but you'll need to remove those 2017 projects that are copied and create new 2018 projects for the 2018 program year. For creating a new action plan, if you're making an amendment to your consolidated plan or you're making significant changes to your action plan, maybe you're adding new goals and removing some goals, creating a blank template may be easiest, and this will require you to go through and complete all the fields and screens. Everything will be blank, and you'll be adding all of that information in for 2018. And again, just for those of you, when you have the PowerPoint deck, if you download the PowerPoint deck, we've just included links here to the different resources that walk you through on copying your comp plan, your action plan, and going through the amendment process. So wanted to save all of those for you here. The last note I want to make on 2018 action plans, and action plans in general, is for the consortia grantees that are on the line. And looking through the list, it looks like there's a number of you who are here. As a reminder, consolidated plans and action plans can only be created by the consortia lead. And this includes if it's copying or if it's creating a new blank template, that action can only be taken by the consortia lead. The consortia lead is also the only member of the consortium who can submit the action plan or the consolidated plan in IDIS. When the lead submits that plan, that will wrap up all of the participating members' plans and to automatically submit them to. If you are a member of a consortium, after today's session, check in with your lead and make sure that all of your schedules are coordinated and lined up in working through any amendments you may have and in completing your 2018 action plan. So I think with that, John, we will just pause real quick if we have any initial questions that have come in.
Sure, Chris. We have a few that came in that we've covered so far. The first one, I think, reiterates something Beth may have addressed. Can we submit the 2018 con plan or AAP before the 2018 allocations are announced?
And that answer
Great question. Yeah.
And that answer is no. You need to wait until you have your actual funding amount and be able to incorporate that into your annual either comp plan or action plan so that your projects add up. Even though you've gone through your process, you need to be on hold right now until you receive your allocations. And remember, we're still under a continuing resolution. We don't have a budget yet. Until March the 23rd, we'll find out if we do receive one or not.
Thanks, Beth. There were a couple of questions that came in regarding the field office and review and completed. So the first one is, does the field office have the authority to mark action plans and comp plans as reviewed and completed? And the follow-up question that somebody else sent in, how long does it typically take for them to do so?
So by regulation, HUD has 45 days to review your plan from the time that it is received, as well as your SF-424s and any certifications that are required as well. During that 45-day period, they are reviewing for compliance for your plan submission. After that, your plan stays in its current status of submitted to HUD while HUD goes through the congressional release process and is able to receive a grant agreement so that it can issue it to you for funding. You're in that hold period. If you're concerned about where you're at in the review process, please reach out to your field office and talk to them. They can keep you up to date where it's at in the meantime. But basically, we have a 45-day window for that review process, and then there's two other steps, the congressional release process and then the grant agreement process.
Great. Chris, want to do one more? Do we have time here?
Sure.
Okay. Question is, how do we copy the first-year action plan that is embedded in the comp plan to create the 2017 annual action plan?
That's a great question. Your year one action plan, just as a reminder, that is, as the question noted, that's embedded in the consolidated plan template. So if you're wanting to make an amendment or if you're wanting to copy that, you actually do that from copying from the consolidated plan. So you're pulling the source information and the start year from the consolidated plan. And in the resources that we send out, we'll make sure that we send out step-by-step examples on that. John, I think we have time for one more question.
All right. How about can the 2018 action plan be submitted earlier than the August 16th, 2018 if done? So that may sort of, again, go back to what Beth was saying earlier.
Yes. So the plan is submitted 45 days prior to your program start date if we have a budget. If we do not have a budget, you need to wait until you receive an allocation. We have a budget and allocation to be able to submit. The drop dead date for all plans across the country to come in is August 16th. That drop dead date is set by statute that says all plans must be in before August the 16th. So you definitely want to get it in way in advance of August 16th based on when you receive an allocation and when your program year start date is.
Great. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, John. Just as a reminder for those of you with questions, you can open up the Q&A pod just by clicking on the Q&A button at the top of your Cisco WebEx panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can submit your questions through that. Okay, let's move on to action plan amendments. For those of you who may be looking at making amendments to your 2017 action plan. And we're going to start here just, I think, a couple of tips and tricks as you're thinking about amendments. We recommend that you try to complete all of your amendments at the end of your program year. And you use the copy function in IDIS to initiate those amendments. You'll copy the action plan that you're amending, your current year action plan, and then you'll be able to make the amendment. You'll copy that, make a new version of it, and make the amendment. All of your amendments must be submitted for review and marked as review completed in IDIS prior to starting your CAPER. This is getting back to what Beth said a few minutes ago, is that review completed mark, or when your plan is changed to being review completed, that is what signals to IDIS to make sure that all of your information will be copying forward, if it's from your consolidated plan to your action plan or from your action plan to CAPER. That is what links all of that data in IDIS for you. And if you go, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but if you start your CAPER before that amendment or before that action plan has been marked as review completed, none of the data associated with that action plan will carry forward.
So a couple of key points for those of you who are taking notes. This is a very important page here that you're looking at. One thing I want to make a note about is that first bullet says complete amendments at the end of the program year. What that means is complete amendments in the system at the end of the program year. Throughout the year, as you want to amend your plan, maybe do a new project or move some money around, you'll do that normal regulatory amendment process that you always do. You'll go out for public comment, you'll put that notice in the paper, you'll do all of that process you've always done with the amendment as usual. However, what we're saying to you is save yourself some time in work, save your rep at HUD some time in work, hold all of those amendments that you have done throughout the year, and update the system at one time at the end of the program year before you start your CAPER or your next action plan. Real important, I can't say it enough, I'm going to be the Greek chorus of this webinar today. The review completed status tells the system to pull any updates and changes into that next CAPER and that next action plan. If it is not in review completed status, it is considered a draft in the system. Your data doesn't move. If you go and create your next action plan or CAPER with a prior amendment not in review completed status, that data will not transfer over. One final real key tip here from this slide. The last bullet says always use your most current AAP or consolidated plan for making a copy or making an amendment. Amendment and copy mean the same thing to us in this system. The reason why, if you remember, as you fill out a consolidated plan, an annual action plan or CAPER, we don't ask you what color the money is. Is it 2014 money or 2015 money? What we ask you is what goals are you going to do? What projects are you going to do? And what money will you use? Are you using CDBG, Home, ESG, or HOPWA? And if not, is it prior year resources? But we don't ask you what year. When you are updating any movement of money from prior years, you want to use your most current action plan or consolidated plan to update that movement of that money to different projects and different activities. Why? Again, it has to do with how the data pulls in IDIS. You want that update to happen and pull into your next action plan and CAPER so that you can continue to report on that activity as it moves forward.
That's such a good point, thinking about identifying what are the activities that you're going to be undertaking in the program year. And something that you and I talk a lot about is thinking about your action plan, your comp plan, that you are telling your story of what you're going to do for that program year, and you are communicating that to your community, to your stakeholders, to everyone who's in your jurisdiction, who's looking at your plan, and they just are wanting to see what is going to be accomplished, and they're not looking necessarily here at the details of which year or what funding year it is. It's just looking at what are the activities that are going to be accomplished and using your action plan to tell that story.
That's right. You'll be doing your grant-based accounting and IDIS when you're set up and funding and drawing activities later on. But in an action plan and a consolidated plan, the big picture here is what kind of money do you have, how much money do you have, and how are you going to use it to reach your goals?
Absolutely. So just thinking about the action plan, we've talked a little bit about the process and what does that flow look like. I think looking here, this is the general flow that we see within the consolidated plan. You begin with your consolidated plan. That informs your year one action plan and then your year one caper. Your year one action plan, you move down to your year two action plan, to your three, year four, and so on. But let's just say if you're moving through that process, you realize that you need to amend your year two action plan. What does this look like within the flow chart of the system? So now you've made an amendment to your year two action plan. You've maybe added a new goal or tweaked something within your program. That means that amended year two action plan is what you'll be using to inform your caper. And again, just to repeat what Beth and I have been saying over and over again, that amended year two action plan needs to be marked as review completed to be linked to that caper. If not, your unamended, your original year two action plan will be what is incorrectly informing your year two caper. You then don't want to copy your original year two action plan to be informing your year three action plan. You would want to make a copy of your amended year two action plan to be informing your year three action plan. So as you're going through the process, wanting to make sure that any amendment or any copy that you're making, to the point that we had on the previous slide, that you are always using your most current action plan or your most current consolidated plan for copying. And again, just for you consortia grantees that are on the line, again, the lead must initiate all amendments. The lead should be coordinating among all the members to make sure that amendments are being completed at one time. And then the lead is the one who is submitting those amendments in the system. So the entry of the amendments into the system to be marked as review completed is done by the lead. And that is true even if the lead is not making an amendment themselves, but it's only being done by one of the members of the consortium. That lead still needs to initiate the process in IDIS. And I'm just going to move ahead here just to talk through what does the process look like, and we're going to come back to these best practices, but I just want to talk through here a little bit of the amendment process and making sure that we can be repeating what we were just highlighting and drilling into that a little bit. So the amendment process within the consolidated plan begins by identifying the amendment need. Once that need has been identified, it is then completing the amendment to the plan, making the changes to your goals, to your priority needs, completing the public comment period, and then updating the program file with the amended action plan, and then for the requirements at 91.505C, notifying HUD of that amendment. That is the amendment process that is tied to the consolidated plan. When we're working off of paper con plans and paper-based action plans and not in the eCon planning suite, that was the same process that you were working off of. And here to the right, looking at what is the amendment process in the eCon planning suite, it is very much the same. You're still identifying the amendment need. You can be completing that amendment in the hard copy of your amendment, of what you have posted on your website or that you're posting in public places, still completing the public comment period. You're still updating your own program files of your amendments, notifying HUD of the amendments, and then as we were recommending, entering all of those amendments in the eCon planning suite at one time, and generally at the end of the year, so you're not creating copies and copies and copies of your amendments and having multiple amendments in one program year in IDIS.
So really what Chris is talking about here is the amendment process hasn't changed just because we moved from a paper-driven consolidated plan process to a system. That regulatory process still happens as always. We're just saying now you're going to update IDIS, and the best way to update it for you from a burdened time period is to hold all those amendments you did during the year and update it once in IDIS. Why? You get to do it one time versus multiple times throughout the year. 2, the field rep only has to look at all your changes at one time through the year. And 3, really important, you don't have multiple versions of your plan in the system. So when you go to create your next action plan or CAPER, you're trying to figure out which is the last one that I now associate my next action plan or CAPER with. So save yourself some work. Hold all of those amendments that you went through the regulatory process throughout the year, update IDIS to reflect those changes one time, and here goes the Greek course now. Make sure that your rep changes it to review completed before you create your next action plan and CAPER. Why? We want those changes to now download into that next document.
And I think here are all of those best practices that you just highlighted of working off of your most recent action plan, completing the amendments at one time at the end of the program year, making sure you're following your citizen participation plan, documenting everything in your program file, and then making sure that those amendments are marked as review completed.
Chris, I just want to point out real quick, if you decide to take that approach and hold all of your amendments that you followed the reg for and now update the system at the end of the year, that doesn't stop you from moving forward with any of those new projects or new ways of spending money that you told the public about through your amendment process. You can go ahead and go directly into IDIS, set up that project and activity, fund it, begin to develop, spend money and develop accomplishments for that. And then later on, when you do that amendment, we will be able to show you how to pull that project that you started in the middle of the year into your current action plan as part of the amendment update.
Great point. I want to pause here. I think, John, we're getting a lot of great questions coming in about amendments. And if we could just answer a few of those questions.
Sure, Chris. So we are getting a lot of questions, so thank you, everybody. One question was, and this actually came in a little bit before this section, but what if you've already started your 2018 action plan and find out that you need to amend the con plan?
It's a great question. And I think we were talking earlier about making sure that everything is linked up. And so if you do find out that you need to make an amendment to your consolidated plan and you've started your 2018 action plan already, I think first, pause on the 2018 action plan in IDIS, go through the amendment process to your consolidated plan, and make sure that you have your amendment updated and completed in the eCon planning suite. And then from there, you actually need to start over that 2018 action plan or create a new 2018 action plan that is linked to that amended consolidated plan. And again, that's all about making sure that the information is flowing through the system. So you would create a new 2018 action plan that's tied to your amended consolidated plan.
And Chris, could you just clarify, I don't want to panic that questioner. When you say created new, that means they can make a copy of the existing and either choose, correct, to copy information over and update, or they can then choose to do a blank one as well.
Correct, yes. So it would just be linking a new action plan that you'd be able to copy over some of the content to that amended consolidated plan. And again, we'll make sure that's highlighted in some of the instructions that we send out. And you can also submit an AAQ and can follow up with you all on that as well.
Great, Chris. So another one came in. When you amend an action plan, are you also amending the consolidated plan? Is there a difference between the two?
Definitely there is. So if you think about a consolidated plan, when you started that process, that was a lot about identifying what your needs were and doing that data analysis and all those data tables. And then you kind of did a strategic plan of what are my goals that and priorities that I'm going to work on over the next 3 to 5 years, depending on the time period of my consolidated plan. The action plan says, which of those goals and priorities I identified in my strategic planning process am I going to work on this year? And how am I going to do that through projects? And what money will I be using to undertake those? If you had a goal or anything in those SP, the strategic planning portion of your consolidated plan, that's what needs to be amended in your consolidated plan piece. An annual action plan is what goals are you working on this year and what money and projects and activities will you undertake this year. If you're changing a goal or if you're changing a geographic priority area, you're going to now update your consolidated plan.
Thank you, Beth. Here's another question. How do you amend the con plan and annual action plan in IDIS if it is marked review completed? Do we ask the field office to mark it as open for editing?
That's a great question. I think Beth and I have both been talking a lot about going through the process of copying the action plan and what does that look like. And this would be where you would make a copy of the action plan. And let me just pull up IDIS here so we can look at exactly what that's like.
So while Chris is pulling it up, here's a little bit about how the system works. And I've told you several times now that review completed tells the system to pull that data and updates that you made into the next document. But review completed also says this is now an official document that the public should be able to say, this is what's happening in this community. And when you're in review completed status, it actually downloads a copy of that document onto the HUD Exchange so anyone can view it. Once it's in review completed, we can't change the status because it's an official document. And that's why we have an amendment and copy process to allow you to make any updates that way. So Chris is going to be able to show it to us real quick here.
Yeah, so here we'll just say that we're looking at amending the 2017 action plan and just in the UAT version here of IDIS, so in the testing region. The important things to make a note of are the year and the version. So here are years 2017 and the version is draft. And to make a copy of this 2017 action plan, and go ahead and click copy under annual action plan. I'd enter in the source year 2017 and the version is draft. New annual action plan year, still 2017, right? I'm just making an amendment to it. I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to call it version 2. It's going to ask me, is it an amendment? There I have the opportunity to select if it is minor or substantial. We talked about this earlier. This is where you need to confirm with both the regs for the consolidated plan as well as your citizen participation plan to determine if your amendment is substantial or non-substantial. Go ahead, select minor, which means non-substantial here, and click copy. And just like that, I've created a new version of the 2017 action plan. And you see that it's now open in progress. So unlike the version that was review completed, I can click edit and open that up and go in and make the edits that I want to. Once those edits are made, can then submit that and then notify my field office so that action plan can be marked as review completed. John, I think time for one more question before we start talking through data.
All right, here's one. Can I amend my 2017 action plan after the 2018 action plan is approved?
Yeah, so yes, you can amend your 2017 action plan after the 2018 action plan is approved. I think there's a little bit more that we'd want to talk through to make sure that we're understanding exactly what that amendment is and why you're going back and amending the prior year, or if you're right at the end of your program year of 2017, coming up into May, and you've already submitted your 2018 action plan. Yes, you can absolutely go in and make those amendments. If it is going back a couple of years and you are reprogramming resources, or you have program income that's become available, those are the prior year resources that Beth was talking about earlier that can be included in your 2017, or in this case, in your 2018 action plan, in your current action plan.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Chris said. The question here really is, why would you want to amend a prior year plan? And if it is about moving a prior year money, remember the consolidated plan process is not a grant-based accounting process. It's not asking you what your funds you're using. It's asking you what's the total resources you have and how are you dividing them up amongst projects and activities. Your grant-based accounting is taking place in IDIS as you fund and draw down dollars. It's really important that those types of updates happen in your most current action plan or most current amendment process, amending the most current action plan, so that information can then carry through to your CAPER as well as your future action plans as well. We want to be able to track that data, not have you create a CAPER action plan later and say, where'd that information go? It's not there.
Great. Thank you, Beth. Well, those are great questions, and we'll have time for more questions. I'm just going to go back. We're going to talk a little bit about data. And so let me bring back our PowerPoint slides. Okay. So we've talked a lot, I think we've talked a lot about making sure that your information is being entered in a way that it is flowing smoothly into the CAPER. And I think it's important to think about where is all the data that's coming into your CAPER coming from. And so you have your CAPER, and that's beginning, there's information coming from your consolidated plan goals and your priorities, your strategic plan screens, where you're identifying these are the goals that we're going to address, these are the needs that we're going to be addressing, and here's our estimate on what the resources are going to be used that we're putting towards addressing these goals, and here are the estimates on what we think the outcomes and the accomplishments will be, those goal outcome indicators that you're needing to identify in your consolidated plan. The same thing for your action plan, but just not looking at a 5-year scale, it's looking at the 1-year scale. This year, what are the resources that you're putting towards addressing those goals and those needs? And what do you expect the accomplishments to be? What do you expect the outcomes to be at the end of the year? Again, I think I mentioned earlier, this is something we look at of telling the story and using your comp plan, your action plan to tell the story of what you're going to be. What are those accomplishments that you're expecting? What is the end of, or what is the outcome of your action plan. Where the rubber meets the road on that is your IDIS accomplishment data, because that's where your activities are, and that is where you're recording what the actual accomplishments and outcomes are. And so all of that IDIS accomplishment data is also flowing into your CAPR. And then finally, prior year CAPR data. Right, your CAPR, you're not just reporting out on what did you do this year, you're thinking about it holistically in your strategic plan, in your consolidated plan 5-year cycle of what are the accomplishments that you made over a 5-year period of time towards achieving those goals and addressing those needs that you identified in your strategic plan and in your consolidated plan. The CAPR is designed within the system to match up all of your accomplishment data. Here, what's in green, the IDIS accomplishment data, with the outcomes that you establish and the goals that you set for yourself in your consolidated plan and in your action plan. It's not matching that accomplishment data to individual projects. It's matching that accomplishment data to the goals, to the big picture of what did you say you were going to do, what were you going to try to achieve, and then you're able to report out on that and explain why you ended up achieving exactly what you did, if it was a little more, if it was a little less, what changed during the program year that you can then report back on to your community, to your stakeholders to explain this is what we ended up accomplishing this year.
You know, Chris, you made a really powerful statement, and for those of you who are looking for tips and tricks about the CAPR, it's really important to notice that nowhere in the CAPR do they talk about projects specifically. What they're doing is pulling IDIS accomplishment data to the goals you assigned to the projects. Many of us are used to looking at our projects and saying, I accomplished this much based on this project. The CAPR is really looking to say, what accomplishments did you do for the goals you set in your consolidated plan?
Thanks. So knowing that this is all of the information that goes into our CAPR, let's think about how that information flows. So in your strategic plan, in your action plan, when you're establishing your strategic plan goals, your action plan goals, and then your projects, you need to identify what the goal outcome indicator is that you're anticipating to achieve. And so that begins at the strategic plan level of saying, we expect the goal outcome indicator to be, in this case, rehabbing existing stock, 200 homeownership units rehabbed. In your action plan goal, maybe you expect to do an even number in all 5 years of your comp plan cycle. And so it's 40, 40, 40, 40 each year. And so there, your annual plan goal is rehabbing that housing stock of 40 units. That then goes down to the project in your annual action plan on the AP35 screen. And again, you need to identify what are those goal outcome indicators. And then finally to the activity, where there aren't GOIs, but for CDBG, that's where you have your matrix codes. What is most important here in looking at this and thinking about how the data communicates, you're using the same GOI for your strategic plan as you are for your action plan, as you are for your project, and then you're making sure that lines up with the appropriate matrix code for what your activity is going to be. When people reach out to me and are telling me that they're working on setting up their strategic plan or their action plan or their projects, I recommend that you print out the goal summary from your strategic plan, the goal summary from your action plan, and then the summary of your projects, and go through and double check and make sure that you're using the same goal outcome indicator for each. And if you're not, if something changes, that's okay, but that will mean that that data is not going to translate correctly. You really want to make sure that you're using the same GOIs from your strategic plan to your action plan to your project, and then that your activity is lining up with the same matrix code. But data linking up, it's really important that you're using the same GOIs. Just a couple of reports, I think we see so many questions coming in of asking for help in terms of reconciling data with IDIS reports or reconciling data within the CAPR. And here are a couple of IDIS reports that can be very, very helpful to double check and cross check all of the data within your CAPR. It's your CDBG activity summary, so the PR03, the PR22, the PR26 and PR28, which are part of the reports that are required within your CAPR, but then also the PR33 and the PR91 for ESG grantees. And these can all be very helpful reports in double checking your CAPR information and making sure that all of that information flows smoothly and is correct in your final CAPR. So with that, there are a number of reasons why your data may not be populating correctly in your CAPR. And Beth and I wanted to bring these up today because so much of this is tied to how your comp plan and your action plan is set up. Number one, and I think we've repeated this enough, but this is where if your action plan is not marked as review completed when you create that CAPR, that data from the action plan will not carry forward into your CAPR. If you look in and see, just so the copy that we just made of our action plan, if that status is open in progress, that data will not carry forward into the CAPR.
Or for that matter, any other status other than review completed. Again, make sure those action plans are marked as review completed. If you have amendments that haven't been submitted and you're expecting to see the data link up to those amendments, if those haven't been submitted and again haven't been marked as review completed, that data won't be carrying forward into the CAPR. So again, if you've created an amendment and the status is anything but review completed, if it's submitted for review, if it's open in progress, if it's reviewed and awaiting modification, that data will not carry forward. It needs to be review completed. Another reason the data may not populate correctly is if you have duplicative projects. So when you set up a project in your action plan on the AP35 screen, that automatically creates the project under the Projects tab in IDIS. And if you are also creating the project in IDIS separately, or if you've created the project in IDIS but have not then linked it to your annual action plan, that data won't communicate into your CAPR. All of that information that you want to be populating in your CAPR, you need to make sure is in your review completed action plan. Right, so here we're just seeing an example of what could be two projects, which is the same project title, public services, but one was created in the action plan and one was created just in the IDIS tab. And if you're operating out of the one that you just created under the IDIS projects tab and not the project created in the AP35, you have duplicative projects. The important thing to remember here is
If you create all of your projects just from the AP35 screen, everything will link up with your CAPR for those projects. If you find that you've done this, you have two options to fix it. You can reassociate the activities with the project or the projects that were created within the action plan, or you can amend your action plan to make sure that it's including the correct projects. And just one more set of reasons why your data may not be populating correctly is if prior year projects were copied into your current year action plan. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more in just a minute as we talk through more on projects. But you want to check to make sure that when you're creating your 2018 project, that all of those projects listed on your AP35 project screen, but those are 2018 projects, because if you create a copy, and most of you on the line are going to be creating copies of your projects, it's going to automatically copy forward your 2017 projects. And you're going to want to actually remove those from your 2018 action plan and create new 2018 projects. Where do you see that? If you open up that project, you'll see the program year. And if that program year is not 2018, you'll want to remove that project and create a new 2018 project. And there is the caveat to that to larger multi-year projects, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But just for many of the projects that you all have, you'll want to remove those and create a new 2018 project. And Beth, just as I pull this reminder up, any other comments that you would like to make on CAPR data and making sure, or on best practices to make sure that that data populates correctly?
Really, the key to having good CAPR data is how you set up that action plan at the beginning, and that ensures that your data flows a lot better into your CAPR. Not only your action plan set up, but get all of your accomplishments in way before you create your CAPR so that you don't have to manually enter any of those accomplishment data that didn't make it into IDIS prior to creating the CAPR later on.
Absolutely. So the checklist for you all to have before you create the CAPR: make sure your action plan's review completed, make sure your amendments are submitted and marked as review completed, make sure your action plan is including the correct projects associated with the activities in which you completed your tasks and your work under, and that it has the correct program year, and that all of your accomplishment data has been entered into IDIS. Do these 4 things before you create your CAPR, and all of that data should be populating for you. Okay. John, before we move to talking through the project setup, I think we've gotten a few CAPR questions.
Yes, we did, Chris. So first question was, why does my activity accomplishment data not populate in the actual column in the CRO5 tables of my CAPR, whereas the expected column populated just fine?
It's a great question. So that could have been for a couple of those reasons that we just talked through on why that data may not be populating. Most likely it was that your action plan was either not marked as review completed when you created the CAPR, or that your accomplishment data was not entered into IDIS when you created the CAPR template.
All right, another question. Does the 2017 CAPR need to be marked as review completed by HUD before you start an amendment on the 2017 action plan?
So I think, let me just reframe that question a little bit. So I think if it's the CAPER that you might be doing in 2017, but is actually tied to your 2016 program year, because that's where the timing would line up. So let's say if your 2016 program year CAPER, does that need to be marked as review completed before starting an amendment or working on your 2017 action plan, or 2017 to 2018? The answer is no. You can begin that next year action plan while your prior year CAPER is still under review.
And if you think about the logic why, a CAPER is saying, what did I do this past year? And let me tell you my story of what I accomplished and what I didn't accomplish and why. But the action plan is pulling data from your comp plan and your prior accomplishments to be able to say, what am I doing going forward?
John, any other questions before we move on to projects?
There have been various questions coming in. Some pertain to earlier things we covered. Perhaps we should keep moving forward and come back to these other questions.
Great. Okay. Well, moving on to projects. So as you were saying, there's two ways to set up your projects in IDIS. And the first is through the AP35 screen. This is through your action plan. And this is in this screenshot, you're looking at where those projects are added. And I know we're squeezing in a lot, so it may not be super clear for all of you who are looking at the smaller monitor. But on the AP35 screen, that's where you can add a new project or create those projects for your annual action plan. You can also add projects through the project screen within IDIS, just as you did prior to the eCon planning suite when you were able to, when you created projects just by adding them through the projects tab. If you choose to add a project not through the AP35 screen, when you go through that process and you search under your action plan, you'll need to make sure that you're adding that project. And let me just go ahead here and bring back up IDIS so we can look at what that's like.
So while Chris is pulling up IDIS, the question sometimes we get is, why would I want to add projects directly into IDIS and pull them into the action plan versus setting them up originally? Well, there's two main reasons. Remember, you were doing your amendments throughout the year and you were going to hold your update to the system until the end of the year. That's a great way for you to be able to go into IDIS, set up that project once you've completed the amendment per the regulation, fund that project and get started. And then when you update the eCon planning suite for that one big amendment, you could pull that existing project into your plan. The other piece is, if you like to set up your projects in IDIS, or you have a staff person who likes to do that and someone else is working on the action plan, being able to pull that existing project in helps alleviate that one error Chris went over about having duplicative projects in the system, one that was set up on the AP35 and one that was set up in IDIS.
So if you choose to add your project through the general project function, as Beth was just describing, not tied to the action plan, when you come in to your annual action plan, and I'm just going to open up the plan that we just copied and scroll to the AP35 project screen, I'm going to come down and click Add a Project. And here you see I have two options. I can search for a project, or I can create a new project. If I know that that project has already been created in IDIS, I can go ahead and I can search for that using the program year, using the project ID, any of these identifiers, and I can click on that link. Once I identify that project, just go ahead and click Add, and that will automatically bring that project into my annual action plan. Now, When I do that, I'm just going to go ahead here and select a project. You'll see it will bring that into my AP35 screen. A couple of things that you need to make sure that you do. One, you need to make sure that you complete the expected resources for that project. Two, you need to make sure that you're selecting the appropriate goal that you're focused on. Going back to the CAPER data slide that we started at the very beginning of the CAPER section, all of your CAPER data is tied to your goals, both your the annual goals and the 5-year goals. You need to make sure that you're selecting the appropriate goal for which this project will be addressing, as well as the priority need. You'll need to complete all of these narrative fields in describing the project, so anyone looking at your annual action plan is going to understand what it is that you're doing, who is benefiting, and how they are benefiting as a result of this project. And then finally, the goal outcome indicators. Again, this is something that we've talked about, of making sure that that information is flowing smoothly from your strategic plan to your action plan to your projects, and that you're using the same goal outcome indicators. One of the links that we're going to send out at the end of this session is an appendix to the comp plan in IDIS guide that provides a crosswalk between all of the goal outcome indicators and then the matrix codes and corresponding units of measurement within the activity setup. So you can use that to make sure that all of your data will be reporting on the same units, on the same outcome metrics that you're including here, so that that data will report correctly within your CAPER. One last thing I'd like to note just while we're in IDIS is that you see here that you can sort all of your projects. You have these sort numbers. These sort numbers, they are not the IDIS project ID. Clicking into one of these projects, there I will see the IDIS project ID, but it is not the sort number on the AP35. That's just the order in which they are listed. That's anything else that you would like to point out in IDIS?
No, I think you've hit the high point.
Okay. Coming back to our PowerPoint, 2 best practice tips that we just highlighted. One is making sure that you're avoiding duplicated projects in the system. If someone is adding that project under the Projects tab in IDIS, don't create a new project for that in the AP35 screen. Pull it in by searching for it, just how I showed you. And on the opposite, if you create that project in the AP35 screen, make sure it's not also created within the Projects tab. And this can be a really good place just to make sure that you connect with everyone on your team who's working in IDIS to make sure that you all are in line with how your projects are being created. And then remember, make sure that all of your projects ultimately are linked on the AP35 screen. Otherwise, that data will not link to the CAPER. Okay, we talked through these project details here. I do think the one other piece of information that I want to note, just to help streamline your CAPER data, it's best practice to only select one goal that your project is supporting and associated with. If you select multiple goals, IDIS doesn't want to accidentally double count any of your data, so it will not by default report those accomplishments in your CAPER. Make sure that you're only selecting one goal. Here we talked through making sure that all of your information is completed within your project tab. The last thing that we want to touch on today is talking about multi-year funded projects. And this is if you're using a project that will include funding from all of your strategic plan years or from multiple strategic plan years. So you create that project in the first year that it will be receiving funding in the AP 35 screen. In subsequent years, you don't need to create a new project, but you can pull that same existing project that you created in the first year that it received funding from IDIS using that search function that we just demonstrated into your action plan, into your AP 35 screen. Use the narrative to describe that it is a multi-year infrastructure project or whatever it may be, and increase the project funding by the amount that you're adding that year. Within your CDBG on the activity side, for the project or for the activities associated with that project, you're just going to want to be making sure if you're creating multiple, excuse me, I'm getting tied up. If you're creating multiple activities, that the accomplishments are being reported through another activity. And then finally, just a reminder for ESG, ESG projects can only be funded in a single year. A lot of information on multi-year funded projects, but I think important just to think through and make sure that you're adding those multi-year funded projects correctly within your annual action plan. Beth, before we move on to questions, anything else that you'd like to highlight here?
Just for one more time, review completed tells the system to pull your updates and changes into the next document. Real important you have that status before you start your action plan or your next caper.
Yes, absolutely. John, it looks like we've got a number of great questions that have come in, so we'll turn it over to you.
Yes, they continue to come in. We'll start with some questions related to project setup. First one, when I updated my projects in the 2018 AAP, the project information, including title, funding amount, and description, changed in the 2017 AAP. Why did that happen?
That's a great question, John. Let me just come back here into IDIS and talk through that process. So in your annual action plan, if you create a copy of your 2017 plan to become your 2018 plan, it will, as we said, it will automatically copy all of your projects going forward. Now, if I click on one of these projects, I'm able to edit a lot of this information. I can edit the title, I can edit the description, the funding amount, but you'll notice there's a couple of things that I can't edit, and that's the grantee name, the program year, and the IDIS project ID. So I'm actually still editing the project that within IDIS is read as IDIS ID number 1 and program year 2016, even though I'm changing all of this other information. So I think what the question and what the asker was experiencing was that copied the action plan forward and then actually went in and overwrote the information from their prior year projects. In this case, I would have been overwriting my 2016 program information. This is why it's so important, if you choose to copy your action plan, when you come to your AP 35 screen, it will have all of your projects there. You'll actually want to go through and remove those projects and create new 2018 projects. Other questions, Jen?
Sure, another project-related one. when creating an activity for a project that has not been added in IDIS yet, what project do you use to create an activity?
It's a great question, and in thinking about the order of activity here, you'll actually want to be creating that project before you create the activity. Now, Beth talked about the example. If you're choosing to wait to amend your action plan to include a new project until the end of the program year, you may want to just add that project directly in IDIS, and then at the end of the year, when you complete the amendment within the system, you will be linking that project back, but you'll want to create that project first. Other questions coming in, John?
Yeah, there is one. It's a little bit from a prior one, but I think it may be important. It's about a consortium, and it was just, must the lead in the consortia set up and submit all amendments?
So the consortia lead isn't setting up. What the consortia lead is doing is they're controlling the status of the plan, right? Making that copy and being able to submit it to HUD. You, as the participating member, once it's open again or the copy is made, are going in and doing whatever updates you need to do. And Chris, maybe you could talk a little further about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the lead, you're initiating everything within the system because all of your data is tied together as a consortium in IDIS. So as the participating member, you'll go through your amendment process as you would in reviewing it with your community, potentially going out for public comment, making the edits, updating your program file. But when it comes to that data going into IDIS, you'll want to make sure, or because your comp plan is tied to the consortium, it will be the lead who goes through that process, which is why I think we said earlier, it's so important to make sure that all of your, all of the members are coordinated in completing an amendment at the same time, so it's not going through that constant cycle.
Thanks, Chris. Let's do one more here. This one revolves around the state. Can you describe the state process for amending its action plan to include projects?
So the state's going to follow the exact same process as an entitlement would. The difference between a state and entitlement is you guys do a method of distribution. So oftentimes you don't know your projects at the time you're doing your action plan. You're instead describing your method of distribution. And that's a great thing. You can move forward with describing your method of distribution, and then once you've decided what projects you've selected to fund, you could enter them into IDIS and then pull them as an existing project into your plan later on through an amendment, or you could decide, as we discussed today, to amend your plan right away, set up those projects on the AP35 screen, and then go into IDIS to set up the rest of the pieces. It's up to you which way. Just remember, you follow a method of distribution, so you're always going to be pulling those projects or setting up those projects after you've submitted a plan, and that's for states.
Thank you, Beth. Here's another one. I've actually seen a couple of these questions come in. What qualifies as prior year resources? We addressed it a little earlier, but I've seen a couple more.
So prior year resources are any funds that, CPD funds that you are using that are not from this program year. When you submit your 2018 plan, you're going to be talking about how are you using 2018 funds. But we all know sometimes you have funds left over from prior years, or you're moving some money around because projects didn't happen from prior years, whether it's 2015, 16, or 17. Those are prior year funds. Each CPD funding source, whether it's CDBG, Home, ESG, or HOPWA, has a prior year resources line listed with it right next to what's this year's allocation and do you have any prior year resources or any prior grant year money you might be putting towards projects this year?
Great, thanks, Beth. John, other questions coming in?
We do have some more. Let me just look at this. How do you correct or update if you have a substantial amendment that you've already copied in the previous action plan? I'm sorry, this one's not quite as clear as I first read it. How do you correct or update if you have a substantial amendment to do and already copied the previous action plan as you go ahead and get started in the 2018 action plan?
It's a good question, thinking through the structure and making sure that you're going through the organization process. And just to come back to the PowerPoint slides, and one of our early slides here in talking through, here we go. In talking through what is the process and making sure that you're going through a sequential order, and I think that's the most important thing to think about as you're moving through your amendment process and creating your plan. So the first is make sure that those amendments are done, and if it's getting through your comp plan amendment, completing that. Once that amendment has been completed and entered, then you can go ahead and you can move forward on your action plan that's associated with that amendment. But you want to start with your comp plan, then move into your action plan, move through completing that action plan, and then ultimately submitting that. I think that's just about time, and I just want to pause and highlight a couple of resources that are on the HUD Exchange, and we'll send out links for, but these are, and we'll be making sure to send to everyone the guidance material, a series of step-by-step guides on how to go through the amendment process, how to go through setting up a new action plan, if it's either copying or creating a blank action plan. What are the steps for preparing your CAPER, and also thinking about some of that data, highlighting the appendix in the comp plan and IDIS Desk Guide. And that'll really walk you through to make sure that you're linking the data from your strategic plan all the way through to your activities, and that you're using a parallel track of goal outcome indicators. I know there were a number of questions that came in that we weren't able to get to today. Thank you all for your great questions. If we didn't get to your question, or if you still have a question, please submit that through the Ask a Question on the HUD Exchange, and someone will be able to follow up with you all. Beth, thank you for joining us, and any last words?
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you use the resources that we'll be sending out to you later, and we will be posting this presentation on the HUD Exchange as well.
Thank you all.